dark, cold heart of Canada, where the Rocky Mountains tremble as they hug the sky, and thick forests guard their secrets deep inside. There stood a farm whose walls were stained with blood. A place where the ground beneath your feet seemed to scream, and the night wind carried the echoes of silenced cries. That farm belonged to a man whose name turned into a nightmare. A man who hid a monster behind his plain. Harmless face, one that dragged innocent women to their deaths for decades. His name was Robert William Pickton, but the world came to know him by another name, the Butcher of Port Coquitlam. Now let me tell you what's waiting for you. In this video, you're about to dive into one of the most horrifying and shocking true crime stories in modern Canadian history. A story that still haunts cops and investigators to this day. I'm gonna tell you how a simple-looking farmer managed to hunt women for over 40 years without anyone noticing. You'll hear how his pigs became instruments of destruction, and how the police spent years chasing a clue that was right under their feet the whole time. From Pickton's twisted, miserable childhood to the day he was finally caught, from the interrogation room to the courtroom, from his sentence to the mark he left on society. You're gonna hear it all, but fair warning, this story ain't for the faint-hearted. Robert Pickton's story starts where most dark stories begin, with a broken family and a childhood full of pain. He was born on October 24th, 1949, in a small town called Port Coquitlam in British Columbia, Canada. Back then, it was more of a quiet little village than a town, where everybody knew everybody, and life seemed calm and simple. But for Robert, there was no peace ever. His parents, Leonard and Louise Pickton, owned a farm that later became the stage for crimes so brutal, most people couldn't even picture them. Leonard was a hard, mean man, a guy who treated his kids with fists and kicks. But the truth was even worse. Louise, Robert's mother, was known around town for her strange behavior. Some said she was insane. Others said she was cold, heartless, a woman who didn't even know how to love her own kids. Robert was the youngest of 3. He had an older brother named David and a sister named Linda. From the very start, Robert was different. The other kids stayed away from him, not because he was cruel, but because he was weird. Always quiet, always off to himself, always staring with that empty look in his eyes. His teacher said he struggled with his studies, but not because he was dumb. It was like his mind was somewhere else all the time. The Picktons lived on a big, filthy farm full of animals, cows, pigs, chickens, and the stench was unbearable. Yeah, one thing the neighbors never stopped complaining about was the horrible smell. Louise didn't give a damn about cleanliness. The house was always a mess, the yard full of garbage and animal waste, and the kids grew up in that filth. Robert learned early how to slaughter animals. His father showed him how to kill pigs, how to cut the meat, how to pull bones apart. For a kid, that wasn't normal. But on the Pickton farm, nothing ever was. But there was something about his mother's behavior that messed him up even more. Louise looked down on her sons, especially Robert. She always told him as a teenager, Robert had no friends. He was the school's punching bag. The other kids stayed away because he always smelled like the farm, wore dirty clothes, and couldn't hold a normal conversation. He was slow in class, and the teachers thought he was simple-minded. But the truth? Robert's mind was complex. A quiet storm where dark plans slowly started to form. When Robert was 14, something happened that might have been the first sign of what was coming. One day, the neighbors noticed a local dog gone missing. A few days later, bits of the dog turned up on the Pickton farm, but not like anyone expected. The dog had been ripped apart in a brutal way, like someone had been experimenting on it. Neighbors complained to Robert's dad, but Leonard just shrugged and said probably some wild animal did it. Still, some folks swore they'd seen Robert come home that day with blood all over him. Years rolled by, and Robert turned into a man. He never married, never had a girlfriend, never lived any kind of normal life. He stayed on the farm, living with his brother David. When their folks died in the 70s, Robert and David inherited the place. But that farm wasn't just a farm anymore. It became Robert's hideout, a place where he could do whatever he wanted without anyone seeing. In the 80s, Robert started throwing parties out on the property. They were weird parties. He'd invite men and women, hand out booze and drugs for free, blast loud music. But the women who came weren't the kind folks would notice missing. They were street women, addicts, people whose families had already written them off. Robert knew that. He knew if those women vanished, nobody would ask questions. And that's where the nightmare started. In the late 70s and early 80s, women began disappearing. One by one, quiet, without fuss, like the earth swallowed them. Nobody paid attention. They were just throwaway women to a society that didn't care. But behind the walls of the Pickton farm, stuff was happening that even the worst nightmares couldn't imagine. Psychologists later said Robert Pickton was a psychopath, someone with zero empathy. He saw women as objects, not people. He'd learned as a kid how to kill animals, and now he did the same to humans. He enjoyed what he did. He felt power. He felt control. That rush kept him going. But why pigs? Why feed victims' bodies to pigs? The answer's ugly and simple. Pigs eat everything. Bone, flesh, even teeth. Pigs can reduce a human body to nothing in hours. Robert knew that. He'd grown up around pigs and knew what they could do. He used that knowledge to hide his crimes. Years went on, and he kept at it. He lured women to the farm, killed them, dismembered their bodies, fed them to the pigs. Some victims he stored in the big freezers he kept around the property. Some he packed into large barrels. But he always made sure no trace was left. He was cunning, methodical, knew how to stay off the police's radar. But Robert made one small mistake. He got cocky. He thought he'd never get caught, that he could keep doing this forever. He didn't know the cops were slowly closing in, and the victims he'd taken were finding ways to make their voices heard by people willing to listen. Now let me take you to the heart of that darkness, the place where innocent women's screams used to echo through Canada's cold nights. Let me tell you what went down on that farm, how Robert Pickton became a hunter, and how his victims fought for their lives until the very end. The first known victim of Robert Pickton was a woman named Wendy Lynn Elkins. She disappeared back in 1997. But some evidence shows that Robert had started killing even earlier. Wendy was a 23-year-old woman struggling with drug addiction, and she'd ended up on the streets trying to make enough money to survive. She was one of dozens of women living in Vancouver's downtown East Side, a neighborhood known as one of the poorest and most dangerous places in all of Canada. The nights there were always risky. Dark streets, drunken high men everywhere, violence and death lurking around every corner. But for women like Wendy, that was just how you survived. They went out every night, hoping to make enough cash for a hit or a meal. But some nights, they never came back. Robert Pickton would roll up to the area in his old pickup truck. He'd pick up women, give them some cash, and take them to his farm. He'd tell them it was just a little party, booze, free drugs, a chance to chill and have some fun. And the women, desperate for money, would say yes. They'd hop in his truck and head out to the farm, never realizing they weren't coming back. When they got there, everything seemed normal at first. Robert would hand them a drink, chat with them, acting like he was some kind, harmless guy. But the drinks were laced. Robert would slip sleeping pills or heavy sedatives into them. And when the women started getting dizzy, when their legs gave out, when their eyes went blurry, Robert would strike. One of his victims, who actually survived, later told the cops what went down. She said, "When I woke up, my hand was chained to something cold and metal. My head was pounding, and I could barely see. Then I saw him, Robert, standing right in front of me with a big knife in his hand. His eyes were empty, like he wasn't even looking at a living person. I started begging, told him I had a little girl, begged him to let me go. But he just smiled, this cold, creepy smile, and said, 'Nobody knows you're here. Nobody's looking for you. And nobody's ever gonna find you.' This woman got lucky. She managed to escape. When Robert stepped out for a second, she somehow freed her hands and climbed out a window. She ran for miles, bloody, shaking, until she reached the main road and flagged down a car for help. But when she told the cops what happened, Robert flipped the story, saying she was a prostitute who attacked him and he'd only defended himself. And the cops, who were a lot more willing to believe a respectable pig farmer than a junkie street girl, let him walk free. It wasn't the first time the cops let Robert off the hook. Over the years, people had complained about him multiple times. But every time, the police either didn't have enough evidence or just took Robert's word for it. That gave him confidence, made him bolder. Most of Robert's victims were indigenous or addicted women, people society had forgotten, women who could vanish and no one would even bother to look. Some of their families waited months, even years, hoping for word, but nothing ever came. And Robert took full advantage of that silence. One of his most horrific crimes involved a woman named Miona Wilson. She was 26, from an indigenous Canadian family. She'd been abused as a child and struggled with addiction through her teens. She had 2 kids who were living with another family, and she dreamed every day about getting them back. The night Miona vanished, she told her friend she was going to a farm with a man. Her friend warned her to be careful, but Miona said she needed the money. It was too good a chance to pass up. She got into Robert's truck and no one ever saw her again. What really happened on that farm, only Robert and Miona know. But from what cops later found, it's not hard to imagine how bad it was. In one of the farm's buildings, police discovered a room with walls splattered in blood. Huge hooks hung from the ceiling, the kind butchers use to hang meat. Chains, ropes, and the kind of tools you'd use to chop up a body. That room was Robert's nightmare chamber, the place where he dragged his victims and turned them into something that wasn't human anymore. In one corner of that room, the cops found a tape recorder. When they played it, they heard a woman screaming, a voice begging, "Please, please don't kill me. I'm a mother. I need to get back to my kids." And then they heard Robert's laugh. Cold, hollow, lifeless. The police could never confirm if that voice belonged to Miona, but her family was shattered when they heard it. Miona's mother later said, "I see my daughter in my dreams every night, begging me to help her, but I can't do anything. I couldn't protect her when she was alive, and now all I can do is pray for her soul." Another one of Robert's victims was a woman named Serena Mark. Serena was 25, a mother of 4. Her heroin addiction had pushed her onto the streets. Every day, she'd promise herself it was the last time, that tomorrow she'd get clean. But tomorrow never came. The night she disappeared, she was standing on the street with a friend. A middle-aged guy was driving, but I couldn't really see his face. It was too dark. He called Serena over and told her he could take her somewhere she could make good money. She hesitated at first, but when he flashed a $100 bill, that was it. She told me, "It's just a few hours. Go home. I'll be back by morning." But she never came back. The friend said she tried to write down the license plate, but the darkness and the distance made it impossible. All she could make out was that it was an old blue pickup, the same one Robert always used. Robert gave Serena a drink, spiked with sleeping pills. Within minutes, she started to feel dizzy. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She collapsed, and the last thing she saw was Robert's cold smile staring down at her. When Serena woke up, her hands were chained to the wall. She couldn't move, couldn't run. Robert stood in front of her, holding a long knife. Serena started begging. She said, "I've got 4 kids. They're waiting for me. Please, let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear." But Robert just shook his head and said, "It's too late. You shouldn't have come here." And then Robert started. He attacked Serena, beat her, and when she stopped moving, he hung her on the hooks dangling from the ceiling, just like he did with animals. Then he carefully butchered her, taking apart her bones, stripping the flesh, and dumping everything into big barrels that he later fed to the pigs. But this time, Robert made a mistake. A tiny piece of Serena's tooth got left behind in a corner of the room, somewhere the pigs couldn't reach. That tooth would become one of the key pieces of evidence against him years later. Serena's family waited for months for her to come home. Her kids stood by the window every night, waiting for their mom to walk through the door. But she never did. Her oldest, an 8-year-old girl, said later in an interview, "Every night, I begged God to bring my mom back. I used to think maybe she didn't love me. That's why she left. But later I found out she didn't leave us. She was taken. A monster took her." Another one of Robert's horrifying crimes involved 2 women he brought to the farm in the same night. They were friends, both addicts, both homeless, both women no one would ever come looking for. One was Andrea Joesbury, 22, and the other was Cara Louise, 27. That night, Robert offered both of them to come over to his farm for a little party. He promised he'd pay them good money, give them free stuff, and let them stay till morning to rest. Andrea and Cara, cold, hungry, and desperate, said yes. They hopped into his pickup truck and headed out toward the farm. When they got there, Robert led them into this old, beat-up trailer sitting on the property. It was one of his favorite hunting spots for his victims. The trailer was filthy, dark, and reeked of rot, but Andrea and Cara didn't say a word. They just wanted to get paid and get the hell out. Robert handed them some drinks, saying they should chill a bit before the party starts. But Andrea had a bad feeling. She whispered to Cara, "This guy's weird. Let's go." Cara shook her head. "We need the money. Just wait a little." A few minutes later, Andrea started feeling dizzy. She tried to tell Cara something was wrong, but her tongue wouldn't move. Cara felt the same way. Both of them collapsed to the floor, eyes shutting. "You two can watch what I do to your friend." Cara started crying, begging, "Please, we didn't do anything. Please, let us go." But Robert just laughed. "You really think someone's looking for you? You're just 2 junky hookers. Nobody wants you. Nobody cares where you are." He went for Andrea first, stabbing her again and again while Cara had to watch. Kara screamed, cried, begged, but she couldn't move. But this time, Kara fought back. As Robert got close, she smashed her head into his face with everything she had. He stumbled back, dropped the knife. Kara, still tied up, dragged herself toward the door. She kicked it open and started running while Robert screamed behind her. She ran, legs still bound with rope, tripping and falling, but she kept going. She knew if she stopped, she was dead. She made it to the main road, where a passing car saw her and stopped. The driver, a middle-aged man, was shocked at the sight of her. He rushed her to the hospital and called the cops. But when the police showed up at the farm, they found nothing. Robert claimed he'd never seen those women, said Kara was lying, just another junkie whose words couldn't be trusted. With no solid proof, the police couldn't do much. Still, this was the turning point. The first time a victim had escaped and told the cops what really happened on that farm. Later, Kara told reporters, "I see that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see Andrea begging, and I can't help her. I survived, but a part of me died that night. I'll never forget what that monster did to my friend." After that, Robert went quiet for a while. He knew the cops had their eyes on him now, but he couldn't stop. His addiction to killing was too strong, and a few months later, he started again. One of Robert's last known victims was a woman named Marnie Frey. She was 28, with 5 kids. After losing custody of her children and going through a divorce, she fell into addiction. Every day, she tried to make enough money to get back to court, to get her kids back. But that day never came. Marnie disappeared in December 2001. The night she vanished, she called her sister and said, "I can make some good money tonight. Tomorrow, I'm going to court to show them I'm turning my life around." Her sister later said, "I told her to be careful, but she said, 'Don't worry, I know what I'm doing.'" That was the last time I ever heard her voice. Marnie went to the farm. What exactly happened to her that night is unclear. But based on the evidence found on the farm, we can make some guesses. Pieces of Marnie's clothing, bits of her hair, and even her teeth were discovered on the property, all stuffed into barrels that Robert used to stash the remains of his victims. Marnie's kids waited for years, hoping their mom would come back. Her oldest son, just 10 years old, prayed every night that she'd return. He had no idea that she would never come back, that she had fallen victim to a monster with zero human empathy. Over 20 years, Robert Pickton may have killed more than 49 women. Some sources even suggest the number could be higher, maybe 60 or 70. But because he destroyed the bodies so thoroughly, it's impossible to know the exact count. What's certain is that Robert was one of the worst serial killers in Canadian history, and his crimes shook the whole country. But why wasn't he stopped? Why did the police fail to catch him for so many years? The answer is simple and bitter. His victims were people society didn't care about. They were street women, addicts, homeless. When they went missing, No one asked questions. The cops assumed they just moved to another town or had died somewhere. But the truth was far darker than that. And now, let me take you to the moment when finally, after decades on the run, Robert Pickton was caught. The moment the truth came out and the world realized the horror that had unfolded right in the heart of Canada, on what looked like just another ordinary farm. Years went by, and the families of the victims kept waiting. They filed complaints with the police, put ads in newspapers, stuck up posters on streets, but nothing came of it. Women kept disappearing, one after another, and the police still couldn't find any pattern linking all the vanishings. But in the late 90s, a detective named Lori Shenher started digging into these cases. She noticed that a ton of women had gone missing in Vancouver's East Side downtown area, and they all shared a similar profile. Addicted, street-working women with little to no family support. She started gathering info and realized these disappearances couldn't be random. She was sure a serial killer was at work. Lori put together a team and started talking to street women. She promised them if they had info, she'd help them, wouldn't arrest them, just wanted to know the truth. Slowly, the women started opening up. They told Lori about a middle-aged guy with an old blue truck who cruised the streets picking women up. Some friends of theirs had gone with him and never came back. One woman told Lori, "I went with that guy once. He took me out to a farm, way out of town, nowhere around. He gave me money and then asked me to do some weird stuff. I had a bad feeling. I knew if I stayed there, I wasn't coming back alive. I used the excuse of going to the bathroom and ran. He chased me, but I made it to the road and a car picked me up." Lori collected this info and started checking who around Vancouver had a farm and owned a blue truck. The list was long, but one name jumped out: Robert William Pickton. He had a small criminal record, including a complaint about assaulting a woman on his farm. Lori decided to dig deeper. In February 2002, the police got a search warrant for Pickton's farm. Officially, it was for illegal weapons, but really, they were looking for evidence of Robert's crimes. When officers entered the farm, what they saw shook even the most seasoned cops. The place was like a ghost town. Old, broken-down buildings, abandoned trailers, trash and waste everywhere. The stench was so bad that some officers felt sick. But what was truly horrifying was what they found inside the buildings. In one building, the police found a room with walls covered in bloodstains. Old blood, fresh blood, layers of it, showing the room had been used for killing over and over. Huge hooks hung from the ceiling, the kind used in slaughterhouses. On the floor were big plastic buckets filled with blood and tissue remains. In a corner, they found a large fridge. When they opened it, they discovered something that shocked even the veterans: human body parts packed in plastic bags. A woman's head, another woman's hands, pieces of torsos. Everything frozen and preserved, like Robert intended to use them later. In the trailer where Robert lived, the cops found even more personal items of the victims. Purses, ID cards, jewelry, photos. Robert kept these as souvenirs, mementos of those he had killed. Every victim meant something to him, a trophy, a mark of his power. In the farmyard, the police started digging. They knew if Robert was really a serial killer, he must have buried bodies somewhere. What they found went beyond imagination. Under the soil, human remains, bones, teeth, bits of clothing. Some were so old that identification was impossible. But the most gruesome discovery was in the pig barn. The police collected samples of soil and pig waste for testing. Results showed human DNA. This meant Robert had really fed the victims' bodies to the pigs, and the pigs had eaten them. One of the detectives involved in the investigation later said in an interview, "When we realized what he had done, we were all shocked. We dealt with serial killers before, but this one was different. This guy had no feelings, no remorse. He was literally a monster." Robert was arrested the very day of the search. He was working on the farm when the police approached him. When one officer told him he was under arrest, Robert didn't react. He just looked at them with that same empty, lifeless stare he always had, holding out his hands for the cuffs. He didn't even say a word, like he had been waiting for this moment, like he knew it would eventually happen. When they were taking Robert to the police car, one of the detectives asked, "You know why you're here, right?" Robert just tilted his head and calmly said, "Yeah, I know. Nothing else." He didn't even invoke his right to remain silent. He just stayed quiet, like he'd been waiting all these years for this moment so he could finally rest. The news of Robert Pickton's arrest hit Canada like a bomb. Media swarmed the farm, cameras capturing every angle, reporters interviewing families of the victims. Everyone wanted to know how one man could get away with this for so many years without anyone noticing. The mother of one victim, a woman named Sherry Goddell, fell to her knees and started crying when she heard the news. Later, she told reporters, "I waited 20 years for this day. 20 years of going to bed every night thinking about where my daughter was. Now that I know what happened to her, my heart is broken, but at least now I know where she is. At least now I can mourn her." After Robert's arrest, police began a full-scale search of the farm. It took 6 years. They dug up every meter, searched every building, sifted through every patch of soil. During this search, human remains belonging to more than 33 different victims were found. But police knew the actual number of victims was higher, as many bodies had been completely destroyed. One investigator involved later said, "We found things that still haunt my nightmares. Human bones mixed with soil, teeth found in pig waste, skull fragments thrown in corners. This farm was a graveyard no one even knew existed." In one building, police found an old office that belonged to Robert. In it, he had written notes detailing how he chose his victims, how he brought them to the farm, and how he disposed of their bodies. This office became a key piece of evidence against Robert at trial. On one page, Robert had written, "I want to get to 50. That's my goal. I've finished 49. Only one left." This showed he treated it like a game, a challenge, a goal to reach. Humans were just numbers to him, not living beings with feelings or families. But why did Robert do this? Psychologists who examined him said he suffered from antisocial personality disorder. He had no empathy for others, couldn't understand the impact of killing on a victim's family. For him, killing was just an act, something he enjoyed and felt powerful doing. Some psychologists also noted that Robert's mother's behavior during his childhood played a major role in shaping his personality. A mother who belittled him, told him he was worthless, showed him no love. These behaviors made Robert feel he had no value, and the only way he could feel power was through controlling and killing others. But many people rejected these explanations. They said lots of people have tough childhoods, but not all of them turn into killers. They said Robert chose to do this. He knew what he was doing and continued because he was a true monster. During the farm search, police contacted the families of the victims to tell them that the remains of their loved ones had been found. Heartbreaking, because there was no hope left for their loved ones to come back. But comforting, because at least now they knew what had happened and could finally grieve. One of the victim's sisters, a woman named Claudine Bowman, after hearing about her sister's death, said in an interview, "I always hoped that one day I'd open the door and my sister would be there, telling me it was all a mistake, that she was okay. But now that I know she's gone, that a monster killed her, I don't know how I'm supposed to live with this pain. But at least I know justice will be served. That monster will be punished." After his arrest, Robert Pickton was moved to a solitary cell. He waited there for his trial. During this time, he spoke with his lawyers, but never showed remorse, never asked for mercy. He was just waiting for the day he would stand before a judge and answer for what he had done. And now, let me take you into the interrogation room, the place where Robert faced the police for the first time, and where, for the first time, we heard from his own mouth what he had done. The interrogation room was small and gray. A metal table in the middle, 2 chairs, and a camera in the corner recording everything. Robert sat in one of the chairs, his hands still cuffed. He stared at the table, motionless, quiet, like his mind was somewhere else. Detective Dan Asperden, one of Vancouver PD's most seasoned interviewers, walked in. He had a thick file, jammed with evidence against Robert. He sat down opposite him and just looked at him for a moment. Robert looked back, but his eyes were that same empty, dead look. The detective started, "All right, Mr. Pickton, you know why you're here, right?" Robert tilted his head and said, "Yeah, I think I do." "Detective, good. Then let's be straight with each other, okay? We found a lot of stuff at your farm. Things that show you did some very bad things. Now I want you to tell me what happened." Robert was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "What stuff did you find?" "Detective, you know what we found. Human remains, blood, personal items of women who went missing. They were all on your property." Robert went quiet again. He looked down at the table and for a moment seemed to be thinking. Then he said something that even the veteran detective found shocking. "The number, right?" "Detective, what?" "Robert, the number of remains, right? How many did you find?" For a beat, the detective couldn't speak. He looked at Robert and realized this man genuinely felt nothing about what he'd done. He was only worried whether the police had found all his victims. The detective took a deep breath and said, "We've found remains from 33 people so far, but we know the number's higher. You wrote in your notebook that you wanted to get to 50. So tell me, how many did you kill?" Robert smiled, a smile that made the detective feel like he was talking to the devil. Robert said, "I don't know exactly. I don't remember. It was a lot." "Detective, you don't remember? You killed people, not animals, people with families and kids. And you say you don't remember?" "Robert, they were all the same to me. Didn't matter." That hit the detective like a knife. He was speechless for a moment. He wanted to scream, wanted to lunge at Robert, but he knew he had to stay professional and keep going to get a full confession. "Detective, okay then, let's start from the beginning. Who was the first person you killed?" Robert looked up at the ceiling, like he was thinking. Then he said, "A long time ago, when my dad was still alive, there was a woman. I don't remember her name. She came to the farm for a party. That night, I put something in her drink, something to make her sleep. When she woke up, I was next to her. She started screaming, but there was no one to hear. The farm's out, in the middle of nowhere. I just wanted her quiet, and then everything happened." "Detective, you mean you kill her?" Robert, "Yeah." "Detective, and what did you do with the body?" Robert paused for a moment, then said flatly, "I chopped her up, like with the pigs, like my father taught me. Gave some to the pigs, buried some in the yard. It was simple." The detective felt sick, but forced himself to stay in control. He asked, "And after that, you kept going?" Robert, "Yeah. After that, I realized I could do it and no one would notice. So I kept going." "Detective, how did you pick them up?" Robert, "Easy. I'd go into town, where the street women hung out. I'd give them money. Say they could come out to the farm and have a good time. They always said yes, 'cause they needed the cash. When we got to the farm, I'd give them a drink with a sedative in it. After that, it was easy." "Detective, and you never felt like you were doing something wrong?" Robert looked at him with those empty eyes and said, "No, they were nobody. No one was looking for them. No one wanted them. I thought I was doing them a favor, saving them from their lousy lives. The detective, furious, shot back. Saving them? You're saying killing them was a favor? You're a monster, you know that? Robert didn't flinch. He just stared at the detective and said, "Maybe I'm a monster, but at least I'm honest. At least I admit what I did." And stop, but what about the rest of society? They tossed those whores aside. They forgot them. And then when I came along and got rid of them, everyone's shocked. But really, you're all to blame. You set this whole thing up. The detective wanted to say something, but he couldn't. On one level, Robert had a point. Society had forgotten those women. The cops didn't give a damn, and that neglect paved the way for Robert. But that didn't excuse what Robert did. He was still a killer, a monster who needed to be punished. After a few minutes of silence, the detective asked, "Can you tell us where you left the rest of the bodies? Families have a right to know where their loved ones are." Robert thought for a second and said, "Some of them I buried in the yard. Some of them the pigs ate. And some of them I mixed with the pig meat and sold." The detective froze. "What? You sold human meat?" Robert said, cool as you like. "Yeah, we sold pork from the farm, and sometimes I mixed human meat with the pork and sold it. Nobody could tell the difference." That confession hit like a bomb. The detective ran out of the room to tell the rest of the team. The police immediately started checking who'd bought meat from that farm. The results showed hundreds of people had bought meat from the farm over the years. Many of those folks were sickened and in shock when they found out what they'd eaten. Some couldn't bring themselves to eat meat for years. The interrogation went on for days. Robert gave more details about his crimes, how he killed his victims, the ways he hid the bodies, and the feelings he had while doing it. But throughout it all, he never showed remorse. He just stated the facts, like he was talking about the weather, not about killing people. In one of the sessions, the detective asked, "Did you ever think of those women as people? That they had families, kids, people who loved them?" Robert paused for a beat, then said, "No, I never thought of them as human. They were just things I could use. I knew they had families, but I didn't care. I only thought about myself, about what I wanted." Detective, and what was it you wanted? Robert, a feeling of power, of control. When those whores stood in front of me, begging me not to take their lives, I felt like a god, like I decided who lived and who died. That feeling was addictive. Robert's confessions helped the police figure out what kind of man he was. He was a true psychopath, someone with no empathy or regret. He thought only of himself, and he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted, even if that meant killing dozens of innocent people. By the end of the interrogations, Robert admitted to murdering 6 women and said he'd probably killed more, but couldn't remember exactly. The police charged him with 6 murders, but everyone knew the real number of victims was far higher. Now it was time for Robert Pickton to stand in front of the court and answer for what he'd done. It was time for justice to be served.